Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Lloyd Burrell from the website electricsense.com. Today, I'm thrilled to have as my guest radiation and human health expert Stephen Magee. Stephen's work as an electrical engineer has taken him to the world's leading astronomical facility in Hawaii in 2008. He commissioned the largest thin film photovoltaic installation in the world. In 2009, Stephen received a biologically toxic EMF exposure, which led to the realization that he'd been displaying the symptoms of low-level radiation sickness for many years. Stephen is the author of numerous books. His latest book is entitled Curing Electromagnetic Sensitivity, which, and this is a direct quote from the back cover of the book, documents his journey into the radiation sickness condition of electromagnetic hypersensitivity and the many steps he took to cure it, unquote. Today we're going to be talking about Stephen's breakthrough with healing himself, and specifically we're going to be talking about these subjects: what Stephen calls radiation resistance supplementation, the role of exercise in recovery, the importance of grounding and the issue of stray voltage, and how plants and trees can help us in dealing with electrical sensitivity. Stephen lives with his family in Tucson, Arizona, and you can contact Stephen via his website, environmentalradiation.com. That's all one word, environmentalradiation.com. Stephen, welcome to the program.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to have you on and to speak to you at last. Now, this is a recorded interview, listeners. Stephen's public speaking skills have been affected by his EHS, and so please bear in mind that when listening to this interview, please bear that in mind. Okay. So, my first question, Stephen. I mentioned in my introduction that your work as an electrical engineer has led you to travel extensively and has brought you into contact with certain, let's say, unusual or high-powered electrical installations. So I'd like to talk about your background and how this all started, this radiation sickness condition, as you call it in your book.
Yeah, to be quite honest with you, I think I've displayed it throughout most of my career. And, I started out as a apprentice electrician at the city centre hospital. And then I went on and got a degree in electrical and electronic engineering and moved into the telescope industry. And that took me to high altitudes. And nobody told me that when you go to high altitudes, that the radiation levels increase from space. So I really was getting nuked at high altitudes, and I could feel it. I really didn't understand what was going on. And I moved out to Hawaii, and it got worse out in Hawaii, and it was much higher. We were up at 13,800 feet in Hawaii. And I was just seeing like a degradation in my health. And it got really bad when I moved into my solar-powered home that I built. And I put a really basic inverter system on the home called a modified square wave or modified sine wave inverter. And it really is a form of a square wave that comes out of the inverter. And it's very noisy, and it creates dirty electricity. And I wasn't aware of that when I purchased the unit. And the longer I lived in the home, the sicker I became, to the point where I was just fatigued all the time in that home in the end. And I changed jobs, and I came to Tucson, Arizona, and started working at the observatory out here. And much to my surprise, I was expecting to get healthier because in Hawaii I was working nights and living in this solar-powered home. So coming to Tucson, Arizona was a move back onto utility electricity and a more normal daytime lifestyle. And the opposite happened. I actually got sicker when I came to Tucson, Arizona. And it was a mystery for years why that happened. And I later realized that I was actually sitting every day next to the electrical room at work. So my desk butted up to the wall of the electrical room. And in that electrical room, it wasn't just an electrical room with electrical switches. It was a computer server room. And it had wireless routers in it, wireless networking equipment. All the telescope control equipment was in there. Everything for the facility was in that room, and I was next to it. So it was a pretty nasty electrical room to be sitting next to. And that's when I really started seeing the voice problems. The voice problems started showing up. I used to hold daily meetings. And I found by the time I left that facility, I could barely speak in those meetings. My voice was getting so bad. And it was quite apparent to everybody around me that by the time I left, that I was quite sick compared to when I arrived into the facility. So I worked there for about 3 years, so it was progressive. It didn't come on overnight, but over the 3 years, I went from being relatively okay and showing fatigue to not being able to speak in public. So it was kind of a blow to be a manager and lose my voice.
Yeah,
it's very hard to manage people.
Yeah, difficult role.
I moved from that into solar. I thought solar would be better, and it wasn't. I actually got much sicker in solar, and I didn't know back then that these solar photovoltaic systems have all kinds of weird emissions coming out of them, and some of it is solar.
Right. So just wind back here a sec. So initially, just to get clear on this, so everybody's clear. So initially, this all started off. You got these initial exposures, as you see. Anyway, this is how you see it. You've got these initial high altitude radiation exposures, and by that you mean what? You mean cosmic radiation?
Yeah, basically. I mean, as you should think of the atmosphere as a filter, and when you're down at sea level, it's filtering at its best. And as you go closer to space, you reduce the filtering effects. So the higher up you get into the atmosphere, the less filtering there is from the atmosphere, because the atmosphere absorbs radiation. So there's more radiation in the atmosphere, and it's coming from the sun, so the solar radiation is much stronger, and it's also coming from everything out there. I mean, the space emits radiation, as do planets. The reason why we can see planets and stars is because they're emitting radiation, and that's why they put the telescopes on very high mountain peaks, is so that they can get the best, highest levels of radiation coming into the telescopes, so that the telescopes work better.
Right.
So, yeah, you get very high and very unusual radiation levels at high altitudes.
Okay. And how long were you working at high altitude?
I spent a decade, and it got progressively higher. I started out at about 8,000 feet, and then I went to 13,800 feet. I spent 5 years at that altitude, and I did it both of a day and a night when I was at 13,800 feet. And the radiation levels are different between daytime and nighttime, so that's another thing that goes on. So I got both exposures while I was at 13,800 feet. And then I moved down to 7,000 feet.
You got both exposures because you're working days and nights?
Yeah, so when I went to the Keck Observatory, I was initially hired in as an electronics manager for the summit. And I spent the first year and a half managing the summit staff at the Keck Observatory. And then an opportunity came up to move on to the night shift, which I was very interested in because I found the science fascinating. So, the whole astronomy side of things is completely fascinating to me. So to move on to the nights and start working with the astronomers was, a really big incentive for me. And I also suspected it was healthier. So I was actually getting sicker the longer I was on days. So I thought, well, maybe the night shift is healthier. So when the opportunity to move on to the night shift came up, I took it, and it actually was healthier. It's kind of one of those unusual jobs where the night shift is actually healthier than the day shift because of the environmental conditions.
Right. So, which is unusual, yeah. So we got these radiation levels at altitude. We've got this, what you call modified sound wave inverter, which was operating on your home, creating dirty electricity.
Yeah, I should mention that, yeah. the whole time I lived in that home, the phone line used to buzz like crazy. And what I didn't realize was the phone line was acting like an antenna system to all the radio frequency that was coming off. So you can never get a clear telephone call in that home.
Okay. So is that how you realized that there was something going on, that maybe there was an issue?
Yeah, I actually spoke to the electrician about it, and he said to me, all off-grid homes do this. All off-grid homes have the noisy telephone line. It's normal.
Right.
That's what he told me. So,
But he didn't
I
know
was aware
why.
something was up, and it was different from a normal house, but I didn't know what it was, because I'd never been trained.
You didn't know why.
To troubleshoot electromagnetic radiation.
Right. And so you did some research, and you learned about dirty electricity.
So I was still mystified when I left Hawaii. I'd just seen my health degrade. I didn't know about radio frequency sickness causing fatigue. That was completely unknown to me at the time. So the time where I started to realize something really, really bad was after I commissioned the solar power plant in 2009. And I walked out of it, and I couldn't remember anything. Just like telephone numbers, couldn't remember them. I couldn't remember the alarm code to get into my home, to call people up so I could get into my home who knew the code. And, just names and computer passwords. I had to start writing everything down, because every day my memory just didn't seem to function right. And it was random as to whether I could remember stuff or not every day. So I became one of these people who had to keep everything written down in case I forgot it. And that's when I really started realizing something was up, and that's when I encountered the condition of radio wave sickness. When I came across that condition, I'd never heard of it before. So, I went into electrical engineering at 16, and I got all the way through to the age of 39 without ever hearing of the condition radio wave sickness. And the condition of radio wave sickness was characterized back in the 1930s.
Oh, yeah.
So, it wasn't as if it was new or, it hadn't been around very long. It's been known about since the 1930s, and nobody ever taught me about it.
So something of a taboo subject, would you say?
Could you say that again?
Is that because you think it's a taboo subject?
Yeah,
in your workplace?
That's kind of what I ran into. Once I actually discovered the subject of radio wave sickness and started delving into it, it's like, oh wow, this really explains a lot of my career. So, yeah, I delved into it, and,
But what I'm saying is, did you get the impression that people, your hierarchy, knew about this problem and didn't want to talk about it, didn't want it be made public?
Well, I was working for one of the largest power companies in the USA. It's one of the largest power companies in the world. And there's absolutely no doubt that they have seen radio wave sickness in their workers. Electricity's been around for 100 years. It gives off radio frequencies. People who work with the high-powered electricity get sick. So there's no doubts about that. So for them to be seeing effects in me, I was at that power plant for approximately 2 months. I took it from being a non-working power plant all the way through to being connected to the grid and producing power and being in full service. And I saw a wide range of health conditions show up. And when I started reporting health and safety issues with the power plant to the management, I ran into a wall. It was I went from being Mr. Popular to being a person that people didn't want to be around. So it's, as you say, it's taboo. You start encountering these problems in the electrical industry, and you follow the health and safety rules that are published in the company documentation, and you'll find in many companies you'll be looking for a new job shortly once you start doing that. That seems to be how the health and safety system works in the USA.
Okay. So, in terms of your symptoms, so you say you had memory loss, but I know there was a lot more to your symptoms than that. You spoke about it in your book. Can you just share with the listeners what kind of symptoms you experienced?
Yeah, the number one thing I've shown for many, many years, and this is going back to my childhood, is fatigue. It's the strange fatigue. And, when I started realizing that, radio wave sickness causes fatigue, and it's the number one symptom of radio wave sickness, I started reflecting on, my childhood and where I've been. And, the home that I grew up in my teen years had lamp dimmers. And lamp dimmers are horrendous for creating radio waves. So I can remember, kind of being at school trying to do my homework and being fatigued. It's like, I don't really want to do my homework. I'd rather just lay down and take a nap. I kind of associate that now with the lamp dimmers that the home had. So, I advise people not to have lamp dimmers in the home. And I've done a lot of testing on lamp dimmers, and they do like really weird things to the cables. The cables go from being very low emission to being very high emission when you put a lamp dimmer on it. So
memory
there's a lot
loss.
of people who have lamp dimmers, and they're probably quite sick, and they don't realize it's their lamp dimmers. And the other thing about that home was, I remember my brother and my mother, they had rashes, and that's another symptom of lamp dimmer exposure. It can cause like weird things to occur in the skin. So if you're getting rashes and you've got lamp dimmers, you might want to change out your lamp dimmers for normal light switches.
Right. Okay, so everybody get rid of your lamp dimmers. It's not a problem for me. I don't have any. So in terms of symptoms, so memory loss, massive fatigue.
Fatigue was the big one, and forgetfulness. You start becoming forgetful, randomly forgetful, and you tend to notice it with things like passwords. You suddenly start not being able to remember passwords that you had no problem with before, and phone numbers. You have to start looking your phone numbers up instead of just being able to dial them from memory. When I was at MDM at the observatory in Cape Peak, the big thing that I was getting there was hot skin. I was getting very, very hot skin to the point where it was virtually unbearable. It was just hot day and night, and it's just like you're in this alien body, and you just got these random aches and pains, and your skin is like really hot. And the other thing that was showing up was nerve pains. I was getting these really weird nerve pains in my head and in my hands. And I was going to the doctor, and the doctor was clueless. And not only was I going to the doctor, I was going to the doctor at the University Medical Center here in Tucson. It's supposedly the best hospital that wins awards, but they couldn't diagnose it. I ended up with a diagnosis of shift work disorder. So all these strange conditions that were showing up got diagnosed as shift work disorder, which I don't think those symptoms match shift work disorder. So it seemed kind of an unusual diagnosis to get. And at no point was radio wave sickness diagnosed. And because I never got the radio wave sickness diagnosis when I was showing those conditions, it led to me becoming very hypersensitive. And that particularly got bad when they installed transmitting utility meters into my community. So we had what's called an Itron 100G gas meter installed in the community a few years ago. From that point, my health just really tanked. And for me, that was a turning point because I saw my health really tank over 3 months. And then I was like, I can't get rid of these meters. The gas company's saying that they will only take the meter out of my home, but they won't take the surrounding meters out. Radio waves don't work like that. I mean, my neighbor's meter is 15 feet from my home, and, they wouldn't remove it. And it's still there today. So when I realized I couldn't get it removed, it's like, well, either I'm going to get really, really sick, or I'm going to do something about this that I have to change something. And that's when I started going down the radiation resistance route and developing the radiation resistance techniques.
Right. So in terms of what you can do then to deal with this, in terms of what you've done to deal with this, so what you recommend, firstly, if I understand correctly, is prudent avoidance of these man-made
that's
EMFs.
the number one thing. I mean, I've been researching that for quite some time, and avoidance is the top thing you can do, but it's not, if you just do that, you're not going to get better. I think that's pretty clear. I think there's a lot of people who've gone the avoidance route, and unless you go out to the countryside, that seems to be about the only solution that works for people. But if you want to stay in the city environment, avoidance doesn't work alone.
Well, you can only run so far, can't you?
Yeah.
You can't run away from the 21st century.
Yeah, and going out to the countryside has its problems because of GPS. Your GPS unit works everywhere. It works anywhere you go in the world. The GPS unit works. So that tells you that the countryside is filled with wireless radiation from satellites. So even going out to the countryside is not going to get you away from wireless radiation. It just tones it down.
Right. So prudence, avoidance only takes you so far, and this led you to develop another way of dealing with this, and this way of dealing with your symptoms you've called radiation resistance supplementation. And you compare this technique to charging lead batteries. So my question is, what does this technique entail exactly?
Yeah, so how I discovered it was I was growing plants in the home, and I'm going to take a little step back from that. I was growing plants in my office at work, and I was researching the reflection of light off plants for human health. So the idea was to put the plant next to a lamp, and the light coming out of the lamp is white, and the plant modifies it to the green, and then you get the green reflection. And, I felt pretty good in my office with the lights and the plants. And the plants were all growing very well until I lost my job. And then I came home, I brought all my plants home, put them in the house. And within a month, they were all stressed. And it's like, what's going on? All these plants have been in my office for months, growing just fine. I bring them home, and now they're all deforming. And that's when I started realizing that there was something really, really funky going on in this home that I had purchased here in Tucson, Arizona. And I actually live near cell phone towers. I've got 3 cell phone towers between 2,000 feet and 2,300 feet from the home. And the community has transmitting utility meters. And bringing these plants home revealed that they wouldn't grow. And some further testing started to show that they were in strange electromagnetic fields. And that's when I really started getting into the electromagnetic field work. And I started buying more of the plants. And the particular plant that was showing the most stress was the Dieffenbachia. So I went down to the shop. I bought more Dieffenbachias, brought them into the home, put them all around the home. And it didn't matter where they were in the home. They all showed the same stresses. And it changes from being this plant with leaves the size of your hand to being this plant with little tiny green glossy leaves. It looks like an alien plant. It's completely different.
And how long did that take for that to happen?
So it goes through the full transformation from being a healthy plant to a sick plant over 6 months. And it's kind of based on the new growth. All the new growth comes up as this really small, tiny leaf growth with glossy, shiny leaves. And all the original leaf growth just dies off, and you end up with this really retarded, alien-looking plant. And I started wondering, what can I do to stop these plants from deforming? And so I started running various experiments on them. I started getting into the original research that was done on electricity. Was done using plants, and I found that out by reading, I think it's Blake Levitt's book on electromagnetics. And in that book, I think it's only a short paragraph, but it basically says, they were growing plants by connecting them into grounding systems, by hooking them up to batteries. And I was like, well, this sounds pretty interesting. I'm going to try hooking up a plant to a battery. I'm going to try hooking one up to a grounding system. I'm going to see what happens. So that's what I did. And the one that got hooked up to a grounding system, that really deformed. And the one that got hooked up to the battery grew perfectly. So that's when the light bulb went off. I was like, oh, wow. There's something about this plant being hooked up to a battery that makes it grow normally. And that's when I realized that, something has changed in the atmospheric environment in the home, and there's a DC voltage gone missing, because I was aware from the work that I'd done with lightning that there was a DC voltage in the atmosphere, and all animals that walk around on the surface of the Earth and plants get exposed to that DC voltage. And you could replace it by hooking the plant up to a battery, and replacing that DC voltage caused the plant to grow normally. So the next step, logically, was to see what happened if I connected the battery up to me. So I connected up a 1.5 volt D-cell battery between my foot, the sole of my foot, and my wrist using anti-static straps. And I saw this like really weird urine
So is this
reaction.
like a small battery? Is this a big battery?
A single cell flashlight battery.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, they call them a D-cell over here.
Right.
And I saw this really weird urine reaction occur. My urine got this really strong chemical smell to it for months. And I was like, what's going on? So I was getting concerned. I didn't know what the human health consequences were to being connected up to a single-cell battery. So I was like, well, how can I do this in a safe way where I can be confident that the side effects are not going to get me? Because I don't think anybody knows what the side effects of hooking a human up to a battery long-term are. So I realized that, batteries are made out of metals and electrolytes. You need two metals. They've got to be different metals. And you need an electrolyte, and you put them in there, and a voltage will develop between the two metals when they're immersed in the electrolyte. And that's how batteries work. So I thought, well, I need to ingest two different metals, and I need to ingest electrolytes. And electrolytes are salts, and metals are supplements. So they're commonly found in vitamin supplements. So I ordered some metal supplements, and I ordered some salt supplements, electrolytes that sports people use, and I started taking them, and I observed the same reaction in the urine. And then I measured the body voltage, and sure enough, I had 0.5 volt between my foot and my wrist. So the human appears to be a single-cell battery. And the lack of that voltage...
And how did you, I beg your pardon, how did you measure your body voltage? Just
with a digital multimeter. And I stood on a barefoot on a piece of foil with one lead connected to the foil. And then I just held the other lead between my thumb and forefinger.
Okay.
So, and you have it on DC volts, and certainly the voltage, it goes up and down. It depends on the day, but the voltage goes up and down. It typically averages 0.5 volt.
Okay.
And the highest voltage I found in my body was on my dental bridge. I have 2 dental bridges. So on that, I was getting about 0.7 volts.
And how did you measure on your dental bridges then?
Oh, I just put the probe to the back of the dental bridge. It's all metal, so it gets a good contact. And
about 2 volts DC on your
dental?
That
was 0.7 volts on the dental bridge. So it was the highest voltage in the body. And I consistently had 0.5 volt all over my skin. Didn't matter where I touched the probe on my body, it was 0.5 volt. So it appears that metals and electrolytes, when you ingest them, they appear to be very important to human health. They certainly, I live in a very high-powered radio wave field from the cell phone towers and the transmitting utility meters, and that appears to collapse the DC voltage system of the body. So if you're in a high-powered radio wave field, you appear to need to supplement for DC voltage, and that means you need to take metals and electrolytes. So I routinely now take metals and electrolytes.
Okay. Which is curious in the sense that that metals react. There's been studies carried out on this that metals react with EMFs, and there's some kind of relationship between having a high metal content in your body and getting symptoms.
It's interesting because
the more metal you've got in your body, then the more chance there is of you being sensitive.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And the thing that this comes down to is there's a big difference between metals being in the natural state and metals being purified into pure metals. So what you're ingesting in the supplements are not pure metals. They're what you find in the ground. And metals are found throughout soil.
Minerals.
So yeah, it's basically trace minerals. You're taking trace minerals and trace metals. And they only turn into metals by refining them. So pure metal is very, very different from the metals that you find distributed in nature. And I should mention that the reason why I originally started going down the metal route was I was curious as to whether I could turn the body into a Faraday cage. So I realized that, well, if you're going to turn the body into a Faraday cage, it means you need a lot of metal inside you. And I was curious as to whether if I took a lot of metal supplements, whether I would start exhibiting the Faraday cage and have reduced EMF sensitivity. So that was another aspect of the metal research.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to work. Certainly, I've got metal dental bridges. I've got two of them, one on the left nervous system and one on the right. So I'm kind of fortunate that they're balanced out between the nervous systems and they cancel out in the EMF world. But I also had a root canal, and this gets back to the metals. There was two metals in my root canal. There was the metal cap, and what I didn't know is there's a metal rod inserted into one of the roots to support the cap. And I had that removed, and I was very suspicious of it because it had never really been right ever since it was done. And it had been redone, and it was never right after it was redone. So I had it removed, and I watched my health after I had it removed, and I didn't see any reaction to having it removed for the first day. But the second, third, and fourth day were marked by this humongous headache. And it seemed to be a withdrawal headache from having the root canal removed. Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you got a lot of metal inserted into your body that you've picked up from dentistry or accidents, and the medical industry has installed it, you may be in trouble.
Right. So this radiation resistance supplementation, it's a great name, as you call it. So there's two parts to the process. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. There's a charging process.
So basically what appears to have happened in my situation was because the DC voltage, atmospheric voltage, has gone missing in my area. It caused my body to discharge and basically turn into a flat battery. So being an electrical engineer, I know about charging of batteries, and I know that you need to charge them at a high rate initially. And then when they become fully charged, if you keep charging them at a high rate, you damage them. So when you start realizing that the battery is fully charged, you need to reduce the charge to what they call a float charge. And that is just a much, much lower charge that just keeps the battery topped up, but doesn't overcharge it. And the same thing seems to apply in the human, is that you need to, when you discover that you've lost the DC voltage and you need to charge the body, you need to charge it at a high rate, so you need to take quite high dosing of metals and electrolytes for a prolonged period. And then when you start seeing overdosing symptoms from that high dosing of metals and electrolytes, you then switch over to the floating process, which is a much, much lower level, and it prevents you from discharging again. So
how do you know then when to change?
Well, I started seeing weird stuff. I was getting very, very forgetful. So that was a sign. I was also
just to be clear, you're on the charging process. So you're taking these trace minerals, maybe some vitamins, that kind of thing. Electrolyte capsules also. So you're on this charging process. So my question is, at what point in time, how do you know when to go on to the floating process? That's to say, change your diet.
Yeah, you'll just start seeing weird health symptoms that weren't there before you started. And you need to refer to, there's charts around on the internet that discuss vitamin overdosing and the symptoms that each vitamin overdoses associated with, so you need to be familiar with that. But, you know, the thing that flagged it up to me was, you know, I was doing this testing on the refrigerator, and I didn't tell my partner. My partner found out about it and was really mad at me when she found out that I put a timer on the refrigerator because it's got all her breast milk in for feeding our daughter. And, you know, my reaction was like just really weird to her being mad at me. And I started laughing, and it was uncontrollable laughter. And it's a sign of zinc overdosing. So some of these overdosing symptoms will do very strange things to you. And they change your personality. They change the way you interact with people. And that was one of the things that I noticed was, wow, that was really weird that I started laughing inappropriately. And, you know, a little bit of research on multivitamins flagged up that zinc, too much zinc causes that. So that's a zinc overdose. So that's when I realized that, you know, I really needed to tone down the multivitamins. And the interesting thing about the zinc overdose was I was actually dosing at the rate prescribed on the bottle. So I went into zinc overdosing only taking the recommended dose, which I found kind of weird. You know, I would never have expected to go into zinc overdose at the rate that was recommended.
Right. So, charging process with all these various minerals, vitamins, brewer's yeast, psyllium husk, electrolyte capsules. It's all laid out in your book how to do this, what it is, what you did. And you also talk about something called rouleau flushing. What does that entail?
Yeah, you know, how that came about was I have been pruning a tree in the garden. You know, I only have one large tree on my property. It's in the front garden. It was there when I purchased the property, and it got to be fully grown. You know, it's about 30 foot tall, huge canopy on it. And I became aware through testing of the bedrooms that the bedroom that you would sleep in next to that tree would give you very weird dreams. And you would wake up all kind of weird the next day, and you'd be all fatigued. And, you know, I could only take it for about a week in there. And I realized that, you know, the bedroom was very distinctly different to any other bedroom in the house. And so I started looking at what could be different about the bedroom. The only thing I could see was that it had the big tree next to it. So I decided to cut the tree down. It's just kind of one of those experiments. I thought, well, you know, there's only one way to get to the bottom of this, whether it's the tree or not, and that is to cut the tree down. So I went out there, put my ladder up, and I climb up to the top of the tree, and I start heavily pruning it. And, you know, I fill up a trash can, and then that evening I got this, like, really bad headache. It's like, what's going on? And the headache just prolonged throughout the week. And I tend not to take medications because I research the human health. I tend to avoid taking medications because medications...
Because of the side effects?
Well, they kind of throw off your research. You know, I want to know, is this headache going to last 3 days and clear up? Or is it going to last a week and clear up? And if you throw medications in there, you don't really know. So I tend to avoid taking the medications, but this headache was so unusual that after a week it hadn't cleared up. And it was getting worse. It's like, I haven't experienced this before in my research. What's going on? And I did a little bit of research into trees, and it turns out that trees have been known for about a century to be antenna systems. And radio frequency engineers frequently use trees as antennas to transmit and receive radio frequencies from their equipment. And this was an effect that was discovered when they were developing radio, particularly in the wars, where they had to set up transmitters quickly. And the fastest transmitter that a person could set up was to hammer a nail into a tree and connect their radio transmitter to it. So it's very, very well documented in the radio frequency industry. And the power level, the radio frequency power level on the tree peaks about 2/3 of the way up the trunk. And that's exactly where I was working in the tree. It's like, oh, wow, I've had a really, really nasty radio frequency exposure off this tree. And the top of that tree is in a radio field of about 850 millivolts per meter. And the bottom of the tree is electrified. It's in a ground that has stray voltage in it. So the tree is energized. There's absolutely no doubts about that. And being in contact with it for like an hour really brought on this heavy headache that just would not clear up. So it's like, well, how am I going to clear up this headache? And so I thought, well, you know, one of the things I wanted to do for a while is I've wanted to flush the body. And this is the opportune time to do it. So I just started dosing with aspirin. And I started with a low dose for about a week, and then I ramped it up to the full dose for another week. And I got all the nasty aspirin side effects. And then I ramped down the dose again. And by the time I did that, the headache had completely gone. And I kind of associate doing that with the reason why I'm no longer reacting to Wi-Fi and wireless transmitters is because I actually believe that, you know, I had clots in my brain, and that when you get clots in your brain, you're going to get these weird reactions, because what happens when you walk into a radio field is your blood thickens. And if you've got restrictions in the passages of your brain and your blood thickens, you're going to start getting headaches. And you're going to start seeing weird brain functioning. So that seemed to clear up a lot of the...
Which is where we get this term from, rouleau formation.
Yeah, I mean, all the blood cells just start sticking together.
Done some work on some microscopic work observing blood when people have been spent time next to a computer, for instance.
Yep. I can certainly tell you from my experience, you come into contact with a high-powered radio wave field, you're going to start seeing weird brain stuff. And the rouleau formation is very well understood, and there's no doubt that it occurs. And, you know, it can do very weird things to you. And it seems to do the weirdest things to the brain, because the brain seems to have the narrowest passages. And once you've got some clots and things forming up there that you're not aware of, then, you know, you go into a high-powered radio wave field, they're going to show up. So I think
did you actually have any blood work done to establish if you'd got rouleau formations?
I've never had blood work done. I kind of gave up on the medical profession years ago, and you know, for me, 2009 was a turning point, because I've been going to the doctor over and over and over again with these symptoms that were classic radio wave sickness, and they'd never been able to diagnose it. I mean, I have blotches on my buttocks where I keep my cell phone, which is another symptom of radio frequency exposure. And they were clueless. They didn't understand what it was. You know, and it was kind of strange, because they asked to look at my blotches on my buttocks, and I had to take the cell phone out of my pocket to show them. So they didn't associate the cell phone with the blotches that were forming. I only really realized what was causing the blotches years later, when I started researching what had made me so sick.
Right. So it was an educated guess, shall we say, that led you to realize that you've got these rouleau formations. And so you started with the dosing with the aspirin. And what kind of doses were you taking of this aspirin, and for how long?
Well, you know, I'll never exceed the manufacturer's dose, but I believe it was 2 tablets every 4 hours. I would have to check on that. But I did that continuously for a week.
So 2 tablets. And what size are the tablets?
I think they're 325 milligram. I would have to check on that.
Okay.
Especially the manufacturer dosing.
Right. But you're not exceeding the dosage on the box?
No, I don't recommend people to exceed the dosage on these drugs. Of
course.
But, you know, coming back to
better not, because we're not doctors looking into trouble here. But, so 2 tablets every 4 hours, and you did that for about a week.
Yeah, and I ramped up to it. I took a much lower dose the week before, and I ramped it down the week after. So I didn't just suddenly go on to that dosing.
I see. So at maximum, 2 tablets.
So it was about 3 weeks of dosing. So the first and last week were much lower dosing.
3 weeks of dosing, I see. And so
a week of full strength aspirin dosing, according to the manufacturer's recommendations.
And that
And
really was
that for me. I think that was pretty critical in toning down all this EHS.
So that was a turning point then.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of coincided with not exhibiting reactions to Wi-Fi and wireless transmitters.
Mm.
So, I mean, I basically thinned my blood for 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I'm a dialysis engineer, so I was actually working with blood systems, and one of the things that they do with the patients is thin the blood. So I was very familiar with thinning the blood and preventing blood clots, because that's why they do it in dialysis. So that's kind of where that came from, was my experience with dialysis. And also, you know, kind of going back a step, dosing the body with salts is what dialysis does. So that's where my knowledge of dosing the body with salts comes from, is from the dialysis industry that I worked in for 3 years.
Okay. Okay, that's fascinating. One of the techniques you speak about in your book is rotational sleeping. How does that work?
Yeah, so you just make sure you don't sleep in the same position every night. So one of the nasty habits that the human has picked up is sleeping in exactly the same position every night in the same room. And it's actually quite unhealthy if you're in a radio wave field, because the radio wave fields are patchy. And if you happen to be sleeping in the same position every night and your head is in a high-powered zone of radio frequency, then you're probably going to get quite sick. So how you avoid that is you rotate in the bed. And if you have a large bed, as I do, it means that you're going to move your pillow to the opposite end of the bed every night.
Right.
And because you've got a large bed, you can sleep on the left and right side of the bed. So I start off on the left side of the bed, in the top of the bed the first day, and then I move down to the bottom of the bed the next day. And then I move over to the other side the next day, and then I move my pillow up to the other end and finish off the rotation. So it basically takes, in a large bed, 4 days to do the rotation.
Mm-hmm.
But you're basically moving around the bed in a circular fashion over 4 days.
So you move around the bed. And the other thing
so you're just making sure that you're not in the same position every night.
Right. And also,
an extension of that is to
like Goldilocks.
Yeah. So I was going to say an extension of that is the Goldilocks technique, which is to try sleeping in all of your bedrooms. So spend a week sleeping in each bedroom and see how you feel. And I was quite shocked. All my bedrooms are different. You get a different quality of sleep in each bedroom, and that's how I discovered that there was weird stuff in the front bedroom, because I never slept in the front bedroom because it was the guest room. And my guests had been reporting over the years that they weren't getting good sleep in there. So when I went in there, I kind of knew that I may not get very good sleep in there, but I was shocked at how bad it was. It was really bad. It was orders of magnitude worse than the next closest worst bedroom to it. So yeah, it was some of these bedrooms are electromagnetic hot zones, and you don't want to be in them, and you most certainly do not want to be raising a baby or a child in a bedroom like that.
Right. Something else you speak about is horizon polar sky fatigue therapy, which has got a really jazzy name. I like that. Very jazzy name. So what is this, and how did you discover it?
So it's a variation of the seasonal affect disorder treatment. So it's been noticed in some northern countries that people come down with seasonal affect disorder in winter. And how that shows up is they get very fatigued. And how they treat that is they give them this very high-powered light box to stare at. So they plug it in, it gives out about 10,000 lux of bright light, and some of them give out blue light. And the person sits there next to the box for half an hour every day, and it offsets all the fatigue. It turns out that you can actually do that treatment for free. You don't need the light box. And all you need to do is look out to the horizon. So I call it polar horizon because the least amount of UV in the sky is at the pole. So you want to be looking towards the pole so you don't damage your eyes. And you just sit there and you enjoy the view for half an hour every day. And it works. I was quite shocked at how well it works. So one of the things I should say is I was 3 weeks into that research when I published the book. curing electromagnetic hypersensitivity. I'm now probably about 2.5 months into that research, and I've seen like great improvements in my health since I've been doing that.
So if you're in the northern hemisphere, which I am, then you'd be looking into the North Pole.
Yep. So yeah, you just look to where our North Pole is. You know, if you're not too sure where it is, get yourself a compass, look to where the North Needle is pointing, and sit there and enjoy the view. And
do this at any time of day?
I tend to do it at noon, and the reason why I do it at noon is because most people aren't aware that the light levels are constantly changing throughout the day, and the light gets to the brightest at noon, so you're getting the maximum exposure at noon. So if you sit there looking towards the pole at noon, enjoying the view of the horizon sky for half an hour, then you're getting really bright light exposure, and it appears to be very healthy. And the other thing I'll say about it is, when I first started doing it, it gives you crazy insomnia. You get this horrendous week of insomnia, and it kind of tails off a week later, and then you start seeing the good health come through. So for people who are going to investigate it, and they should be working with their doctors. Anybody who's developing these techniques,
absolutely,
and using them should be under medical supervision. And you'd be surprised at how quickly you change from seeing the negative side effects of the light exposure to seeing the good side effects, the good effects of the light exposure. And had I known about this years ago, I would have been doing it years ago. And I'm very, very happy with it. It's definitely one of the better lifestyle improvements that I've done in this process.
Okay. Interesting. Now, I know you've looked extensively at the question of building grounding, done some work on your own home. Can you explain what this is, why it's important, and what steps you took to correct your home electrical grounding?
So I'm still researching it right now, but I'm pretty far along with that. And the conclusion I've come to is that because of all this work that's going on with dirty electricity that Sam Milham and others have been doing, there's a lot of radio frequencies floating around on the electrical system when you take a look at it. And they're not only on the live, they're also on the grounding system. So to tone that down, you need to have a really good grounding system on your home, and in particular, a very good radio frequency grounding system. And you achieve radio frequency grounding by using 3/4 copper pipes instead of cables. And that's because of the skin effect. So the skin effect is where electrical currents of high frequency will not travel down the center of a conductor. They will only travel around the edge of it. So that's why you use pipes. So you basically run a pipe from your fuse board down into the ground and connect it onto your ground rod. It gives you a high frequency ground. So that's what I've done. I actually installed 2 pipes, and I'm currently assessing it. And I will say that when I installed those pipes, I got headaches. So I wasn't expecting that, but it is a reaction to a changed radio frequency environment. And one of the things that I noticed during this research is that most people think that the high radio frequency levels outside are harmful, and the refuge is found inside the home, and particularly if the home is electromagnetically screened. And it's not my findings at all. I actually find that the days that I spend outside of the home, I feel great. The days that I spend inside the home, not so good. And so I've known that there was something about being inside the home that makes you feel worse than being outdoors. And the radio frequency levels are much higher outdoors. So it was like, well, it's not the radio frequencies that's causing this. So, it's starting to look like it's the emissions from the home electrical cables.
So when
that's why you feel worse when you come inside.
Right. So it's 3/4 inch copper pipes. So these are hollow pipes?
Yeah, it's just plumbing pipe. So you go to the plumbing shop, buy a piece of 3/4 copper plumbing pipe, and hook it up from your electrical grounding system in the fuse board down into the ground and connect it onto your ground rod.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll get a nice radio frequency ground.
Right.
You can install multiple ones, and it's preferable with multiple ones to make them different lengths, because it's a little bit like the pipes on a church organ. You see them different lengths according to the pitch. Well, if your grounding system pipes are different lengths, then they're going to resonate at different frequencies. So they're somewhat of a tuned filter.
Okay. And so that's for grounding for radio frequencies.
Uh-huh.
But what about power? Like the 60 hertz power frequency. What do you recommend?
Most people are using,
done anything for that?
Yeah, I've been kind of researching that, and I looked into the capacitive filters, and this whole commercially is Stetzer and the Stetterizer filter and the Greenwave filter. I didn't use them for my testing. I made my own, and with my own filters, I was finding some quite serious problems, and that was in part from wiring errors that were in the home. So my home had some pretty bad wiring errors that I wasn't aware of. The electrician had made wiring errors in the living room, and he'd also made wiring errors in the master bedroom. And they're the two most frequently used rooms in the home. And what was happening was any time you plug a piece of equipment into those rooms and use it, the room would fill up with magnetic fields.
Yeah.
So it's like highly undesirable. It's like living under a power line. And it was a very simple mistake that the electrician had made on a switched socket in each room. It's easily fixed, and once I fixed it, it cleared up the problems. But researching capacitive filters flagged up that, when I plug them in, because they take current continuously, they fill the room with a magnetic field continuously. And then people start getting sick in the room. So that's how I discovered those wiring errors. And I plugged one of these filters in near to the room where I sleep, and also near to my daughter's room. They're next door to each other. And both of us woke up sick the next day, and I was kind of curious about that. And I researched them a little bit more, and I found that they were giving off radio frequencies. So that's where the radio frequency grounding system came from. So when I realized that, oh wow, I'm plugging these capacitors in, and they're all giving off these really weird radio frequencies, and they're making people sick. That's when I started realizing that, I need to do something to stop this radio frequency effect. So I developed the radio frequency home grounding system. So I'm about to revisit capacitors again. So I haven't given up on capacitors. There's people around who say that they do work, and for that reason, they're worthy of further research.
You say in your book that the UFA ground, which is like the classic ground in the US, as I understand it, can be biologically hazardous because all the steel in the foundations welded together. So you're saying it's acting like an antenna?
Yeah, exactly. So what's happening is these electrical grounding systems are not a ground potential. So this is something that I've noticed in the earthing community where people are walking barefoot. They haven't quite got it, a lot of them, that the utility electrifies the ground. And you don't want to be walking barefoot on electrified ground. But an extension of that is the utility electrifies the ground through the grounding system, because there's not a ground potential. And when you connect your entire home foundation to the utility grounding system, well, they electrify your whole foundation. And you don't want to be walking on it. And that's the problem that I have at my home, because the utility is electrifying the street in front of my home. And then that comes in through the ground into the foundation. So there's absolutely nothing I can do about the electrified foundation. It's something that the utility company needs to fix. And I can tell you that they're very averse to fixing it. They won't even measure it.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, I'm shocked. I'm an electrical engineer. I'm a chartered electrical engineer with the IET in the UK. And, to witness what the utility company gets up to at my home, it's just truly shocking. I would never have believed it had I not seen it. But yeah, I've never seen the utility company measure stray voltage at my property. So I reported them. They're regulated in the USA. So I reported them to the Arizona regulator. And I said, well, given that the utility company is refusing to measure it, that means you need to come and measure it. And they haven't shown up either. So you've got a rogue utility being regulated by a rogue regulator. And I've got to the point where I just find it all quite amusing now. It was annoying me.
I think that's the best way to look at it, isn't it?
Yeah. You know, once you've been in this field for a few years, you just realize that there's so much fraud going on, and there's so much corruption, there's so many lies being told to the general population that, you know, if you let it get to you, it would just really wear you out. So you really got to kind of adopt a sense of humor about the whole thing, and it's just humorous to me to see all these people who are government officials behaving the way that they do. It's embarrassing for them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an awful lot of lies and deceit around this whole, you know, EMF topic, be it the utility companies or the telecom companies. You know, it's the same problem, unfortunately. Yeah. And fortunately, most people are totally unaware of just how dangerous all this is, because they kind of carry on their lives. Unfortunately, there's just so many people that fall sick, and they fall sick in large part due to these exposures, and yet they're totally ignorant that this is the cause, part of the cause of their illness. But such is the world. I think we've just about covered really everything I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
Because you've developed very nicely, really, on you know, so many subjects. I must say one thing I did miss in now don't know which book it was. I've got 3 of your books, but you took some pictures of the plant, and I was thinking, oh, what a shame the pictures weren't in colour. So it's the Dieffenbachia, which is also known as the Domb cane for people that are interested. And there are pictures in, I don't know which book, Electrical Forensics, Health Forensics, those books of that. Anyway, that's what the plant's called.
I can tell you the reason why they're not in colour is that it's just currently atrociously expensive to. Yeah,
I know the reason.
So I'd love to publish them in colour, but it would double the price of the book.
Yeah, exactly. So you say, just to finish off, at one point in your book, you say, today, after years of random aches and pains, I'm pain-free. To what degree do you believe you're cured now?
From the worst to where I am today, I'm probably at least 95%, if not like 98%. Yeah, it's gone from being like absolutely horrendous to being like, oh yeah, I hardly see anything now. The only thing that I'm still seeing from time to time is a bit of fatigue. It's the only thing I see today. And it's very, very mild. So I've gone from, like, you know, back in 2007 through to 2009 were the worst years. And by the end of that period, I was on $400 a month drugs to stay awake. I couldn't stay awake on the job. I was falling asleep at work. And I ended up on a drug called Provigil. And I also ended up on some sleep medications. So that period was absolutely horrendous. And one of the things that I should mention is, you know, the aches and pains were radiation sickness from solar radiation exposures from high altitude work. And I think they were being aggravated by all the radiation exposures that I was getting from the electrical equipment. So when I did the hibernation technique where I avoided the sun for 6 months, all that cleared up. So that's how I knew it was radiation sickness. So just avoiding sunlight cleared all that random aches and pains up, and it was as simple as that. I was walking around in dark sunglasses, hats, long sleeve shirts, and nothing was exposed except for my hands, and they were covered in sunscreen on my face. So I was wearing, like, for 6 months, I actually wore a very high factor sunscreen, like factor 60 sunscreen. To do the detoxification process from radiation sickness from solar radiation exposures and high altitude exposures. That was a major turning point for me, because that's when I realized that, you know, I'm dealing with radiation sickness here, and that's when I started getting wise to the fact it wasn't just radiation sickness, but it was also EMF sickness, and they're all forms forms of radiation sickness. It's all electromagnetic radiation. So, yeah, that was,
I think
that was a real big part of recovering my health.
Yeah. Well, 95% to 98% is really quite something. I think there's a lot of people.
I don't think it was possible. Yeah, to make a dramatic recovery.
Yeah, I think. You've always got to believe it's possible, and I'm sure people listening to this are going to be surprised. Firstly by a lot of the things you've said and shared, which are not really public knowledge at all, and also, by your this success that you've had in dealing with this when so many people are struggling. So it's really important that you've shared your story today. I want to thank you for sharing all these insights. It's been fascinating. I think I'm sure a lot of people are going to be inspired by what you've got to say. I think perseverance is certainly something. It's not a word you mentioned, but it's obviously you're somebody who's persevered with this. And you've tried and tried and tried many things, and kind of the medical community's let you down. Certainly didn't give you any meaningful solutions, and you persevered and you found a way forward. And the other thing is that just kind of to understand people listening to this, that your body can heal. Your body can heal. It can always heal. It's just that sometimes you need to help it to heal a little bit. And it's always possible. There's always a way forward. So thank you, Stephen, for your input today. It's appreciated. My very best wishes on your continued recovery on the remaining 2% or 5%. The book we've been talking about today is entitled Curing Electromagnetic Sensitivity by Stephen Magee, which is on sale on Amazon, and you can also buy it through Stephen's website, environmentalradiation.com. That's all one word, environmentalradiation.com. Thank you, listener, for your continued support. My name is Lloyd Burrell from electricsense.com. Have a great day.